Thank you both so much for two wonderful presentations. It blends together beautifully. I've got so many questions, and I'm going to take chair's privilege, and I do apologise for people that have put their questions in the chat, and I will ask those as well. I start a question. Well, I've got many questions for both of you, but I'll just begin with one each. So I'll start with Adele, and it seems to me, Adele, that the PPI, the Ignite network, it seems hugely successful looking at it from someone from outside. How have you evaluated its success? How do you know it's been successful, though?
Uh, Good question. We haven't done a formal evaluation, Gary, but we have each year looked at the impact that we're having in different areas. And as part of our annual reporting to our main funder, the HRB, we have a number of areas that they ask us to report on the impact. So to date, we have focused at a network level on using our impact casework, our case studies as a way of doing it. Individually across the network, people have evaluated different components of it. In fact, as we speak, for example, the PhD shared learning group is being evaluated by the team in UCC who lead it out, and there's various other parts have also been evaluated.
Brilliant, thank you. And Claire, it's a kind of it's again on this evaluation of impact, but you said that you'd evaluated the PPI co-design service, and I was really intrigued by that because a lot of us in the PPI world now we're put under a lot of not pressure, but we it's a big thing at the moment, isn't it? Evaluating the impact of patient public involvement, and I saw that you used your values and your principles. But what was that process? Did you, for example, develop a particular tool using those principles, or was it like a series of interviews? Can you say a little bit more about how you evaluated the impact?
Absolutely. We were really lucky. We had an undergraduate student who took on that project and the PPI process as part of and the evaluation of that process as her final year project. So she worked with us and the PPI panel to actually develop the tools for her project to evaluate. So it was happening. Um, the project happened over, well, it was over a year, but she came in just at the start of the meetings sessions with the PPI panel. So she was able to attend and observe all of those panel meetings. And then she designed a survey that she co-created with the PPI panel to interview all of the panel members. And she then used it was great. We were able to having somebody dedicated to look at it from that perspective was really useful, and we were able to then link her in with our different researchers or statistics guys or across the center to really create a really robust evaluation tool specifically for this project. But then she was able to do both. She did the workshops as well as the PPI panel process. But we thought that the framework that the PPI Ignite Network had created was a really good first step for us to measure against. But I mean, that's written up as a thesis, and it's something I can share if of interest with the group, even parts to illustrate the methodology and how she analysed the results.
It would be useful to share if you could, because that was going to be my follow-up question. Is that tool available? Because I'm sure lots of people that are having to evaluate their work in terms of PPI would welcome a resource like that. So thank you. Okay, got more questions here. So this one's for Adele. So Adele, you mentioned that there was lots of PPI training. Now, Gareth Vast, was this co-produced and or co-delivered?
So some of the training is both co-designed and developed and co-delivered. And it's something that we have worked to expand, I suppose, over the lifetime of the network. Again, if you think where we started, the number of public contributors who were experienced in PPI was quite small. That has now really extended. So for example, this morning I was in Limerick at an event. It was awards for PhD excellence in PPI, and there were two speakers, an academic and a PPI contributor. So like two keynote speakers, if you like. So we're very much moving towards that model.
Fantastic, thank you. And just as a follow-up to that, you also mentioned that patient public involvement was embedded in education.
Yeah.
That feels to me quite fundamental and a really good measure of embedding it so it becomes the norm.
Yeah.
Could you say a little bit more about that? I mean, have you embedded it, for example, in undergraduate degree programs, nursing education, etc.?
Okay, so where we focused first was postgraduate, and there were, by the time the network started, two of the seven university already had accredited PPI modules at postgraduate level. And that shared development has now meant an expansion of that. So there's now, I think in this academic year, there are at least four and maybe five of the universities with accredited postgraduate modules. And additionally, there's a diploma course in one of the universities, in University of Limerick, which has also helped push that graph up. So yeah, so it's beginning to expand. As far as I'm aware, across the seven universities, it's hard to keep on top of what's happening everywhere. There are PPI is embedded in individual modules that exist. So in medical education, things like that. As far as I know, we don't yet have, and maybe we never will, an individual undergraduate module on PPI at an undergraduate level. It's more about embedding it in, and there's a lot of that going on in existing courses. And both of them, but particularly the work we have done with PhDs, has been really impactful. A lot of them are now graduated and having influence in public sector jobs, in charities, and in academia. It's really, really I suppose, satisfying to see what's happening. But with those, I mean, it's about educating the future leaders.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think that sounds great. Thank you, Claire. Christopher asks, do you link with other EU or indeed British patient and public involvement groups?
We are hoping through our advisory board, yourself, Gary, and the wonderful Bella Starling as well. We haven't to date, but this is something we really recognise as huge expertise. So we would like to. As I said, we're quite early days in terms of creating an official structure for supporting PPI at Quorum. So yeah, that's definitely something we'll look at.
Fantastic, thank you. And a follow-up to that, Chris asked, do you seek feedback from research participants to evaluate their experience to guide further improvements? And makes a link to the NHO in England has the participant research experience survey.
Brilliant. I mean, for us, again, because we're really only starting this as a centre wide from this year on. But I know for previous projects that have been done by PIs in our centre, I know one or two who do, I mean, they've long-term relationships with a lot of their panels and would have. And there's some great, there's a lovely short film actually about one of the projects that has been carried out by one of our investigators on chronic wounds, where the actual idea for the research project came from the patient panel, and the short film or a really short documentary was done as a follow-up to kind of understand what the experience was like. So that's another thing I can share. But as part of the structured support system, we would definitely like to integrate that. So that's a great tip. Thank you very much.
Fantastic, thank you, Claire. Adele, when you started, where did you find the best
Mhm.
practice to begin with? And this is a question from Richard.
Yeah, I saw that question there. I thought it was an interesting question. So I suppose, as I mentioned, there were pockets of best practice in Ireland, and so we had them to draw on. We were also very aware of the work that had been done, mainly with Involve at the centre in the UK, in Canada, in Australia. So we would have looked at what was happening elsewhere and seen the strengths and the weaknesses, because no more than ourselves, there are strengths and weaknesses everywhere. And I suppose that was very helpful because even though we started behind other people, we learned a huge amount by what had gone well and maybe hadn't gone so well elsewhere. So I think that's why we made so much progress so quickly. But critically as well, we learned a lot from each other. So that whole concept of shared learning and reflection. So we very much build in reflection all along the way in terms of how we were going. So yeah, so we looked around, we drew on what had worked well, and we learned as we went. And we particularly, because of that open environment, our community partners, our patient organisations who were also developing PPI, like I should say in Ireland, PPI has really taken off in the patient charity organisation. And the Health Research Charities Ireland, one of our partners, are very strong there. as our IPOSI, they have a lot of patient education work. So we had a lot of people inputting into our thinking.
On that, um, obviously patient organisations, it's a bit of a crude question, but to what extent is PPI in Ireland a kind of a bottom-up thing or a top-down thing? I remember doing a presentation many years back in Dublin. I think when PPI Ignite was just starting, or they were asking for bids, and it was noted to me that whereas in the UK it was much more of a top-down thing. I don't know if that's entirely accurate, but they characterized it that way. So we had Involve, for example, that set the standards or the values, and they were saying Ireland have gone for a much more bottom-up approach in the same way Denmark is a similar thing. So I just want to get
Mm.
your perspective on that.
Yeah, I would very much agree with that, Gary. And I think that was why maybe I mentioned the values and principles as distinct from the
Hmm.
standards early in the presentation. And again, it's that idea that if you make things compulsory, there's greater risk of tokenism. Now, it's not to say we have avoided that completely because we haven't, but we're very focused on trying to avoid it. And so, yeah, it's very much been a bottom up and that idea of shared learning. And again, I suppose even our public contributors, or maybe particularly our public contributors, are an important part of that process because when they see things being done well, they move on to their next experience and can share their best practice that they've and also raise the bar where they go. So I think it's a combined effort by all the stakeholders involved.
Yeah. I
Thank
don't,
you.
sorry, I was going to add to that as well, Gary, if it's okay, because I think that's
Sure.
something is slightly changing. Is there's a bit of a culture shift as well in that our funders, Research Ireland, while our remit 10 years ago when our centre was established was very much around broad public engagement, the focus is now changing towards engaged research and much deeper and more, much deeper engagement with the stakeholders who are going to be impacted by the research. So that is now coming from, I suppose, the top as well as being kind of a more kind of shared value at ground level. But I agree with Adele, even, the people that we've been working with have educated us as we've gone along, from their own experience in the past. So that's been phenomenal. But it'll be interesting to see now because our funder is now changing our requirements in terms of engagement, that it is now engaged research rather than broad public engagement.
Explain to me a little bit more, Claire, about that idea of deeper engagement.
So I guess as a research centre funded through Research Ireland, who there's a number of centres like us. We're the only ones focused on medical devices, but I mentioned Future Neuro, for example, and there are a number of other research centres funded through the same agency. Um, it would always have been a core, I suppose, expectation and requirement from our funder that we would engage with public audiences who had an interest in our work. But in terms of raising awareness and having, I suppose, an educated public who would understand the value of research, and that was really quite broad. And as a funder, they were really hands off in that, in a really good way, in saying that you create a program that works for you and for your audiences because you know them best. And that has worked really well. And I guess what it has allowed us to do over the last 10 years is build really strong relationships with our stakeholders, with people who have an interest in our research, but we haven't necessarily always involved them in the research itself. Now, Research Ireland, for us as a health research centre, are looking at how do we bring that voice right into the beginning of the research process. So in our public engagement program, we had people involved in creating the films, for example, that we do, and the educational teachers involved in creating educational resources. And that's all really good and still really valued, and we will continue to do that. But it's that very much at the end stage, the dissemination stage of the
Right.
research process. So now our funder is starting to look at, okay, well, how do we bring that back further? We've created lots of, like I see a question as well in the chat about, how do we onboard people? I think by creating these pathways in, through maybe lighter touch or more engagement activities like, working with researchers to create a film or an educational resource or to design a piece of an exhibit has been really nice. They haven't had the opportunity across the board, or we haven't had the structure there to support the integration of a patient voice from the beginning of, ideation for, grant writing and grant development. So now the funder is looking at it was encouraging us to find ways to do that. So this is, and I guess we had started down that path before the change in focus in terms of our funder or our requirements, but it's now become central. Sorry, Adele.
No, and sorry, Gary, I'll just
Okay.
add to that, that the HRB, the Health Research Board, have really pushed that bit around being involved in the grant application stage. So that, again, looking back at the 5 years, that's probably where one of the areas I have seen most growth outside of the Research Ireland funded work, that there is increasingly patient involvement in setting the research priorities, answering setting the research questions. It's not happening across the board, but it is beginning to happen more and more because, as you know, one research grant often comes out of another. So when you've worked with a patient group, you have your partners and their enthusiasm and their knowledge, it's an automatic process really to feed in. A lot more to be done, but definitely beginning to happen.
So as part of this deeper engagement is about developing more longer term relationships, perhaps with communities and a better. Fantastic, thank you. A question here from Courtney. This is for Claire. From Claire, sorry. What approaches do you use to help new patient and public involvement representatives get involved in discussions? You did, of course, mention training, but she wonders if there's other tools you use to help on board people. I think you
Yeah.
referred to it in the last answer, but
Yeah, and I suppose we've been I suppose lucky to have had the 10 years to build the programs that we do have. So for example, we've recruited to our panel from with people on our panel who have in the past been involved in our Science on Screen program, for example. So this is working together with researchers, getting to know a certain area of research and creating that short film about it. So it's usually about a 12-month process. So they become really familiar with who we are, what we do, and that area, and that researcher, and they build a really nice relationship there. We also when we screen these films, I can send links. We've got about 10 of them, and we've done one with Adele actually around PPI work in Ireland. But we usually screen them and then host in-person Q&A sessions where we bring researchers, patient contributors, and filmmakers together for a Q&A session in a cinema with uh, an audience to just start asking questions. And they're lovely conversation starters because everyone can watch a movie together and everyone can say, tell me more about that bit. So those have been really powerful. Now it's starting small, an audience, one public audience, you'd have 100 people maybe max, but you have dedicated time to sitting in a room together and chatting about a type of research and giving people the opportunity to ask questions. And I suppose that's a very much our front door for people to kind of get to know exactly who we are, or if they're specifically interested in any area of research, that those kind of opportunities start the ball rolling. I think, as we develop the contributor training, I think we're going to have to learn loads from the people we're working with about what works in terms of further onboarding, like working with our patient advocacy group colleagues. We have always integrated patient panels into information days for filmmakers or producers who are coming to talk to us about research. We'd always have a researcher panel and then we'd also have a patient panel to talk about the two different perspectives. Um, I think I think we've lots to learn about how else we need to support this. There's a lot of the panel that we've worked with have expressed concern about the lack of support for aftercare and the way people adjust, mentally and physically to medical conditions and adapting to a device that we would be involved in developing. So we're looking at other ways to support rather than just having the privilege of getting people to input into our research process, but also see how else we can support and build a community really of PPI contributors to the medtech area, I suppose, as our specialty.
fantastic. And building on that, this is a question for both Claire and Adele. And Richard asks, do you have any tips for ensuring this diversity in your public contributors?
Yeah, so we work hard at that. And I think so there's a few, I suppose, aspects to this. Excuse me. One is the population of Ireland has become very much more cosmopolitan in the last 20 years. So part of getting diversity is targeting younger people. And where I have noticed probably the most important change has been in the values and principles. One of them is flexibility. And I think the PhD students in particular are taking that as a really important part of how they go about things. So we see increasingly maybe meetings late in the evening, meetings on Saturday mornings, meetings in local communities, things that are different from between 9 to 5. So key thing is flexibility around when you have your meetings and how you have your meetings, because online works for people who are confident and capable of talking, to people they don't know and so on. So flexibility has been a key thing that has helped us to move away from, what are maybe the more people who are very willing, really contribute, but don't represent all the voices that you'd want there. So flexibility has been a great focus for us.
Fantastic. I'll take one or two more questions. And Susan is one among several people that mentioned AI in training. And have you used artificial intelligence at all in any of your training?
No.
Nope.
No.
No.
Okay, that was simple. That's absolutely fine. It means we can ask another one. Just bear with me. Um, so I've got one here from Abby. And Abby says, can Adele say a little around how Ignite is embedded in delivering PPI directly in local authority and public health settings?
Okay, so what we're doing is people from those settings are coming to our trainings, or in some cases, we have delivered training specifically to groups who have come to us and said, look, we're trying to embed the public voice in this initiative that we're developing. Will you help us get started? So that's how we have interacted with them. And for example, we've had a number of those kind of communications and attendance with people from some of our government departments. And like, that's brilliant, because getting the whole idea of power sharing and listening to the public voice into the power base, I suppose, is really important. So that's what I was referring to when I talked about that.
Brilliant. Adele, Claire, thank you both for getting up your time and two fascinating and linked presentations. It's really great to hear what's going on in Ireland, and I'm sure we all wish you well with the rest of it, and look forward to hearing them. Hopefully, working with you going forward. Before we close, we have one last slide. Here we go. So thank you all for coming along today. There's a QR code here, which you can scan on your phones to join the International Patient Public Involvement Network if you haven't already. Don't worry, there is no charge at all for joining, but it does mean that you will get advance notice of our upcoming webinars, events, roundtables, and potentially in the future, an online conference as well. Also on this slide, of course, is our website links, our links to LinkedIn, Blue Sky, and also X. So that just leaves me to say thank you again to Adele and Claire. Thank you to Ricky behind the scenes organising this. And thank you, of course, to everybody for turning up today and asking such insightful, wonderful questions. And have a lovely day, everybody, and the rest of your day. Thank you. Bye now.
Thanks very much. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.